Hello, hello, hello. This is Detroit AllyCat, and if you're tuning in for the first time, I'm so happy that you're here. I'm very excited to talk about what we're going to talk about today. So let's jump into it. Without further ado, let's get spooky. So before we actually begin our channel, I'd like to give a shout out to our sponsor, which is Crow Leatherworks, which I will leave the little thingamajigger, the written out thing, the thing that you write. I'm doing so good at this. I will leave it down below, and I have a discount code. He actually made this necklace, which I thought was very appropriate for today. I feel kind of weird when I wear it because I don't want anyone to feel like I'm culturally appropriating, because I completely appreciate this necklace or choker or whatever it is called. I think it's very beautiful, and Crow is actually Native American himself, so I kind of feel like it gives me points for supporting a Native American Indigenous company. And the reason that I decided to wear this particular piece that he made me is we are going to talk about something that I have wanted to talk about for so long. I mean, so long. It's so very important to me, and it's something that a lot of people don't know about, and I don't understand. So before I tell you what we're going to talk about, I want to talk about my family really quick. One of the most positive people in my life was my grandfather, and he was a Southern man, so we would sit on the front porch and eat watermelon and drink lemonade and talk about stuff. And one of the conversations that we had were of Native American women. I just thought they were so beautiful, and the way they danced, and the way their eyes looked, and the way they held themselves. I was amazed with them. I always thought that they were such a beautiful culture. And I sat there and I said, Grandpa, are we part Native American? Hoping that he would say yes. And he was like, well, I think we have like Blackfoot or something in there. And I don't think we have any in it. I mean, honestly, anyone living in America has a little tiny bit of Native American just because we are the melting pot of the world. But the reason I bring this up is because I have so much respect for this culture, and I really appreciate them just sharing the planet with us. And that is actually what led me to find out about what we're going to talk about. And I was horrified and completely in disbelief that no one knew about it. We today are going to talk about the MMIW. And I hope I say it right. It's the Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women. Now, there are two different places that this is actually happening. It happens in Canada, and it happens in the United States. When I originally found out about the MMIW, I found out about it in Canada, and it really shocked me because Canada has like this whole reputation for being one of the most, I guess, neutral countries. We're not violent, we have health care, we are a good country, but I found some really dirty background to Canada. And I'm not saying this to make any Canadians feel like I'm dragging their country. We in America have a lot of bad history here too, and that really doesn't reflect on us as an American, it just reflects on history as a whole. So in Canada, I don't know if it was like 100 years ago or 150 years ago, they would take the indigenous children from the tribes and they would take them and put them in orphanages to adapt them to the culture, which is really sad because they weren't taking children away from families that didn't want their children. They were taking their children away from families that wanted their children, and they were like basically trying to teach them to speak English and no longer how to speak their own language. And they tore apart families. And what actually happened in these orphanages is that they were abused, they were sexually abused, they were torn from their culture, they were torn from their family. It's very, very tragic. And that's how I started diving into this situation that is happening. And I thought, well, if it's happening there in Canada, is it happening here in America? And by the way, they no longer have those orphanages in Canada. But the sad thing is that those children went through a lot of shock, because when they were to return to their tribes, they didn't speak their tongue, and there was almost they felt like they were rejected. That's a whole nother story, but it is definitely the door that opens up to this situation. So let's just jump back into America. We're going to talk about Montana right now, and that's because Montana is the place where two of the cases that I would like to talk about happened, and it seems like where this is happening the most is in Montana. So the population of the indigenous women count for 7%. 20% of the murdered and missing are indigenous people. Do you see how that's imbalanced? It's extremely imbalanced. Right now there's this epidemic where if you were indigenous woman, a Native American woman, that you are 12 times more likely to be kidnapped, murdered, sexually assaulted. And some of the stories that I have read about are just I just can't believe it. Because you have these families with 6 or 7 different children, and there's some families that there are 5 children that have been murdered and only one child left. So let's talk about the 2 cases I want to. So the first case is Kaysera Stops Pretty Places. And the second case is Selena Not Afraid. Both of these cases took place in Montana, and they were both in the Crow Nation. Now, if I have messed up and that's not true, I really deeply apologize. That was in both of the literature that I read about them, and I thought that was a very unusual coincidence. So let's talk about Kaysera Stops in Pretty Places. I thought that was just such a pretty name, because it just reminded me of a child, walking through a yard or down the street, and they see a butterfly or a flower, and they stop and they appreciate the moment. So when I think about Kaysera, I think of this innocent, beautiful girl just seeing the world as a child. And actually, Kaysera was a very beautiful girl. She hadn't even graduated high school. And the story went, so Kaysera ended up going out one night, and she actually lived with her grandmother because there was some kind of incident where she didn't talk to her mother, and Kaysera never came home. So immediately her family knew something was wrong, and they called the police, and they said, we want to report our child missing. And from my understanding, the police pretty much just kind of dropped the ball with it, and they were she's a young girl, she probably went out partying, she'll turn up. And as it turns out, someone was jogging down a street and they found her body behind a house, just laid out behind a house. It gets kind of crazy because instead of immediately notifying the parents, like, hey, or the family, like, hey, we found her, they waited up until I think about 2 weeks before they notified the family. The house that she was found in, they never actually did an investigation on him. And what was really weird is the owner of the house, he had something to do with the mortician industry, and he had some kind of like disciplinary action on him for some things. So it seems kind of bizarre that she would show up dead behind his house and they wouldn't even look into him. But I guess he was cleared, or they said that there was no way that he could possibly have anything to do with it. So after they had kept Kaysera for 2 weeks and had notified the family, they decided that they ruled the death as undetermined, and they immediately said that they were going to go ahead and cremate Kaysera. Now, this is kind of a big deal because in the Native American culture, they don't want to cremate their loved ones, or at least Kaysera's family had this. But for some reason, Kaysera ended up being cremated, so there couldn't really have an autopsy, and it very much hindered the investigation. And it didn't seem like they really cared about doing any investigation. The one thing that I have noticed is that there is some weird laws when it comes to Indigenous people, because you have the reservations and then you have the regular off the reservation. So you have two different forms of law enforcement. You have the reservation law enforcement and you have the regular law enforcement. And they neither can cross either way and investigate either area. I hope that kind of made sense. Somehow, eventually, though, with Kaysera's case, the FBI got called in, which FBI kind of has like a certain jurisdiction that overrides, which is good. And they are still investigating the case to this day, which there was no one was found. There was just nothing. She was found dead. She was withheld for 2 weeks, and she was cremated without telling her family that they had her. It just sounds kind of suspicious. So that is Kaysera. Now we're going to talk about the second case, Selena Not Afraid. It makes me really sad when I see Selena Not Afraid, because she was like so full of life, and the story of her family is so very tragic. I mean, it is tragic. So Selena Not Afraid was actually a twin, and being a twin in itself is like such a magical thing. And what's really crazy is that Selena's sister, who was a twin, ended up committing suicide at age 11. That's a pretty young age to commit suicide. I really haven't done a lot of like research on the ages of children that commit suicide, but I have to tell you that's one of the youngest I've heard of. Like, who at age 11 thinks about committing suicide? Also, she had a older sister who was walking down the road and a car hit her older sister head on. It was not determined to be a murder, but that is kind of a very mysterious way to die. And another sad thing about her family was her older brother. They were very, very close, and there's lots of pictures of Selena with her older brother. And he ended up being in a car, and he was shot down and killed by police. And there's a lot of controversy about this too, because a lot of people say, well, he deserved it. But I've watched the footage of her brother, and I don't know if you guys have ever heard of something that's called death by cop. But basically what it is that when someone is suicidal, they decide that they want to die, and a way for them to die is called death by cop. So basically they commit an act that will force the police officer to kill them. So her brother sat in the car, and they had the video cam on her brother, and you can see him, he's sitting in the truck, and it seems like he's like in really deep thought. But what I caught was the look in his eye. Like, he was just like, it was the look like, it's over, it's done, and like there was nothing he could do. That's the kind of mentality I think he had. And all of a sudden he like pressed his foot to the gas, and like his car starts going towards the police officers as fast as he could. And of course they let loose and they shot him. And everybody was like, oh, the cops did such a great job. I don't think that that's what they should be focusing on. I mean, obviously, that if somebody's aiming your car at a police officer and driving like 100 miles an hour towards you, yes, then you're going to have to do something to de-escalate the situation. But I don't think the point of it was that, you know, the police killed them. I mean, that is a hot subject right now. I think the point of it is that why did he do that? What happened for him to get in a car and do that? I mean, it was so obvious by death by cop. But anyway, let's go back to Selena. So now you know that 3 of her siblings had deaths by very mysterious ways. So there was only 2 of them left, another brother and Selena. So can you imagine that? All right, there's 5 children, and now there's only 2 left, Selena and her brother. And all of them have not died by natural deaths. It's all been something very bizarre and unnatural. So let's talk about Selena. Selena graduated high school. She had big plans. I believe she was like 18 years old. And she decided on New Year's Eve that she was going to go ahead and go to a party. Almost every 18-year-old goes to a New Year's party on New Year's Eve. That's just something you do. And every 18-year-old, I wouldn't say every, there's been kids that don't do it, but a lot of kids are going to parties where they're drinking, they're smoking stuff, they're doing things that, you know, you do as a kid. It's not, I don't stand behind it and say that they should be doing it, but it's part of being a teenager to like make mistakes and basically learn from what you've done. It's just experimentation. It happens when you're a teenager with every aspect of life. So she went to this party, and the next day they got in one of her friend's car. And what's weird is there is like a FaceTime video of this, which I've heard that that's like the new thing to do. Oh no, it wasn't FaceTime, it's Snapchat. They had Snapchat video of this. Apparently nobody Facebooks anymore, and if you Facebook, you're old. So I guess I'm old, but they had Snapchat of it, and they show the Snapchat. They're driving down the road. You can see that someone's drinking in the car, and the car ends up breaking down. And so I'm not sure how this transpired, but they do have like a 2 or 3 second video of Selena arguing with the person that is driving. And what they said, the friend said, is that, you know, the truck broke, the vehicle broke down and that they were going to go ahead and leave, and they were going to leave Selena and her friend at this rest stop, and this person who drove away was going to send their mother to pick these kids back up. Which, if you're part of a culture or a group of people that it seems like you're on, like, I don't know how to say this, that you're in danger of being kidnapped or murdered or something happening, it just seems like that wasn't a very bright thing to do, was to leave these kids at rest stops. Like, don't do that to your friends. Just don't, because it's dangerous. Bad people go to rest stops. So anyway, they drove away, and when the boy's mother came back to pick up Selena and the friend, they could not find Selena anywhere. And they actually found the friend sitting in a ditch with no shoes on, completely confused and unable to tell them anything. So they ended up taking her, but Selena was nowhere to be found. So the police were called, and the family immediately, jumped in. They wanted to find out where Selena was, and they couldn't find Selena, and so they organized all these searches and all these things, and they even had a camper at the rest stop, and they waited there so in case Selena came back, they would be there for her. And something that's also really shady is that the people that were in the car with Selena and her friend that were taking them home that day, that dropped them off at the rest stop, they all disappeared, off the face of the planet. Moved to other states, shut their Facebooks down, shut their Snapchats down. I mean, that's kind of suspicious too. So after about 2 weeks of everyone looking, and mind you, there were drones, there were huge searches where they went through lines and they looked on the ground and everything. No one found anything. 2 weeks afterwards, they found Selena's body. I think it was a half a mile from the rest stop that they got dropped off, and she was dead. The coroner ruled her death is hypothermia. Hypothermia. So Selena just ran away, and nobody knows where she went for 2 weeks. While they were doing this search with drones and hundreds of people, nobody could find anything. And then she shows up 2 weeks later, and she died of hypothermia, which means that her body had to have been there while they were doing the search for her. So obviously we're still trying to find out who killed Selena. Not afraid. If anybody has any information about this, if anybody knows anything about this, if anybody knows anything about Kaysera stops in pretty places, there's hotlines that you can tell them. There's still open investigations, even though they're kind of not, because they've been deemed killed by other things like hypothermia. I just really wanted to talk about these cases because these are not unusual cases. These are actually very common in these cultures, in these tribes, and these women are being kidnapped and murdered, and it's so normal that they have to actually talk about it all the time and warn their children hey, you can't go off here, you can't do this here. And it's just so very sad, because I personally think that they're a treasure, and my heart breaks for the fact that it seems like they're being targeted because nobody cares. And that really hurts, because I'll show you pictures of some of the girls. they're so beautiful and they're so full of life and they have so much to offer the world. And it's just really sad because when you read about like the things that happen on the res and how hard it is on the res and some of the things that happen in these families, it makes me really sad because I feel like we can do better for them. And I really wanted to bring awareness about the MMIW. I think that like, so they have this like symbol that basically shows like your support for them, and it's a red hand, and a lot of women like to put the red hand on their face, Indigenous women. And I really wanted to do that, but I felt like that was kind of inappropriate. But I just wanted to make sure that people knew about these cases, and I piqued your interest to look into these kind of situations because it's so very important that you know and that you're aware that these are happening and that we try to help the situation and we do stuff for these people. It's just a very tragic situation, and yeah, I hope that I was able to tell you about something that you didn't know. And if you do know more, please feel free to talk about it. Put it in the comments. Tell me something that I would love to hear. So yeah, guys, that's my story about two beautiful women that lost their lives tragically, mysteriously. And as far as I'm concerned, I think they were both murdered. So yeah, if you enjoyed my channel, please feel free to subscribe, like, leave a comment, ring the bell, tell me what you think. If you didn't, go drink a shot of vodka, and remember, stay spooky and stay safe.